Monday, October 21st, 2024. Las Vegas woke up under the scorching sun of the Nevada desert, even though the calendar said it was mid-autumn. In her second-floor apartment at Sunset Place, Melissa Jones sat at the kitchen table surrounded by wedding invitations, guest lists, and fabric samples for the ceremony decorations. Her long brown hair was casually pulled back into a bun, and her face was free of makeup, a rarity for a girl who spent her workdays in the brightly lit casino, where appearance was part of the job. David Cole stood by the living room window, holding the phone and dialing the number decisively. His massive frame, the result of years of physical labor on construction sites, seemed too large for the cramped space of the apartment. His hands bore fresh calluses from recent work on a project near the Bellagio Casino, where his crew was finishing the renovation of the facade. "I told you, no last-minute changes." His voice sounded tense as he spoke to the wedding planner. "The ceremony is at the Little White Chapel. The reception is at Carmine's restaurant. Period." Melissa looked up from her papers. In the year and a half they had been together, she had learned to read his moods by his tone of voice. Today, something was irritating him more than usual. "Is everything okay?" she asked when he hung up. "These people think they can change the agreement a week before the wedding. They want to add an extra charge for the music equipment." David sat down opposite her, his brown eyes narrowing. "I'm not used to people trying to cheat me." Melissa nodded, returning to the lists. She was used to his principled approach to financial matters. David always insisted that everything be clearly agreed upon in advance, whether it was rent, utility bills, or wedding expenses. "Want to see the final guest list? There are 37 people." David took the sheet of paper, quickly scanning the names. His face darkened when he saw one of the names. "Jason Morris. Are you serious?" Melissa felt the tension in the room rise sharply. "He's my friend, David. We worked at the same restaurant 3 years ago, before I got the job at the casino." "He's your ex-boyfriend," David said, slamming the list on the table so hard that several invitation envelopes fell to the floor. "And I don't want him at our wedding. We broke up over 2 years ago. It wasn't serious. For you, maybe. But for him?" Melissa knew that Jason still called her from time to time to see how she was doing. Nothing special, just friendly support. But explaining that to David was useless. She saw him clench his jaw, and that was a bad sign. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll cross him off." David nodded, his face gradually relaxing. "Good. I don't want any drama on our day." The rest of the morning passed in relative calm. David left for work at 6:30, as usual, while Melissa got ready for her afternoon shift at the casino. The job of a dealer required constant concentration and the ability to interact with a wide variety of people, from local retirees to tourists from other countries, from businessmen in expensive suits to construction workers spending their entire paycheck in one night. The casino was particularly busy that day. October was traditionally considered a good time for Vegas. The heat was subsiding, but the tourist season was not over yet. Several groups of players came and went at Melissa's table, but one regular customer stayed longer than usual. Linda Cole, David's mother, had been sitting in the third seat from the dealer for over an hour, methodically placing minimum bets and ordering cocktails. At 52, she looked older, the result of years of smoking and constant stress. Her graying hair was dyed an unnatural blonde, and her face was covered in heavy makeup that couldn't hide the fatigue in her eyes. "Nervous about the wedding, dear?" Linda asked, placing another bet. "A little," Melissa replied, dealing the cards. "But I'm more worried about everything going smoothly. David has always been a perfectionist. Even as a child, he demanded that his toys be arranged in a certain order." Linda smiled, but there was something bitter in her voice. His father was the same. Everything had to be exactly the way he wanted it. Melissa nodded, continuing the game. She knew little about David's childhood. He rarely talked about his father, who had died when he was 16. A heart attack at work, a classic story for men in his profession. David is a good man, Linda continued, but the men in our family know how to love deeply, sometimes too deeply. After work, Melissa returned home around 11 o'clock at night. David was already asleep, but there was a note on the kitchen table. Mom called. She wants to meet tomorrow morning to discuss the details of the reception. Wake me up when you get home. Melissa didn't wake him up. He had been working overtime for the past few weeks, trying to finish a project before the wedding, and was constantly tired and irritable. She quietly undressed and lay down next to him, feeling the warmth of his body in the cool room. Tuesday brought new tasks. Linda arrived at 10 in the morning with a box of wedding favors and a list of last-minute changes to the reception menu. Melissa noticed how meticulously the woman controlled everything, from the table layout to the music selection. David said you wanted to invite your ex, Linda said, taking a notebook out of her purse. It was wise to change your mind. Men don't forget things like that. We're just friends, Melissa tried to explain. Darling, there's no such thing as friendship between a man and a woman. Sooner or later, one of them will want more. Linda looked at her seriously. David is investing a lot of emotion in you. Don't give him a reason to be jealous. Melissa spent the rest of the week in constant preparation. Final dress fitting, meeting with the photographer, coordinating details with the church. David became more and more controlling with each passing day. He checked every detail, from the color of the napkins to the arrival time of the guests. On Thursday, an incident occurred that made Melissa think. She met with two friends from the casino to discuss plans for her bachelorette party, a modest dinner at a restaurant on the Strip. When she returned home, David was waiting for her in the living room. Where were you? His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold. I told you, I was meeting the girls. Until midnight? Melissa looked at her watch. It was 11:45 p.m. Time flew by. We were discussing the details of the bachelorette party. David nodded, but his gaze did not warm. Next time, let me know if you plan to be late. I get worried. On Friday, 2 days before the wedding, Melissa felt a strange anxiety. Everything was ready. All the details had been taken care of, but something was weighing on her. Perhaps it was the usual pre-wedding nerves that all brides experience. But when David corrected her again, criticizing the way she folded the napkins for the reception, she realized that the problem was deeper. Maybe we should relax, she suggested. Everything will be fine. I want everything to be perfect, he replied. We only do this once. On Saturday evening, the night before the wedding, they had dinner at home. David was unusually affectionate. He brought flowers, cooked her favorite meal, and talked about how happy he was that she was going to be his wife. But even in these moments of intimacy, Melissa sensed something alarming in his behavior. His gaze was too intense, his hugs too tight, his questions about her thoughts and feelings too numerous. Are you happy? He asked, holding her hand at the table. Of course, she replied, and it was true. She was happy. But for some reason, that happiness seemed fragile, as if it could be destroyed by one careless move. Late in the evening, as they lay in bed, David hugged her and whispered, "Tomorrow you will be mine forever. My wife, my family, my responsibility." Melissa closed her eyes, feeling his hand tighten around her shoulder. Forever echoed in her head as she slowly drifted off to sleep. Tomorrow would be the start of a new chapter in her life, and she had no idea what awaited her. Sunday, October 27th, 2024. The morning of the wedding day began with the typical Las Vegas cacophony of sounds, car horns on the Strip, the distant hum of slot machines, and helicopters circling overhead. In her room at the Palms Hotel on the 23rd floor, Melissa woke up at 6 in the morning, even though the ceremony wasn't scheduled until 4 in the afternoon. According to tradition, she spent the last night before the wedding apart from her groom. David stayed in their apartment, while Melissa booked a room at the hotel where they planned to spend their wedding night. The room was modest but clean, standard furniture, a large bed with a view of the mountains, and a small bathroom. Nothing luxurious, but acceptable for a couple on a modest budget. She stood by the window, sipping coffee from a plastic cup and watching the city slowly wake up under the morning sun. A strange calmness came over her. After weeks of intense preparation, the day had finally arrived, and now all that was left was to trust the flow of events. At 9 o'clock, Linda Cole arrived with two of Melissa's friends from the casino, Karen and Debbie. The women brought the wedding dress, cosmetics, accessories, and lots of advice on how to spend the day. Linda immediately took charge, assigning tasks and making sure everything went according to plan. Hair first, then makeup, and finally the dress, she commanded, laying things out on the bed. We have 4 hours, but it's better not to rush. The next few hours were spent in women's conversations and preparations. Karen, who had been a dealer for 7 years, told stories about her colleagues' weddings, most of which ended in divorce within 2 years. Debbie, who had recently remarried, gave practical advice about married life. Linda listened attentively, occasionally interjecting comments about her son's character. "David is very devoted to his family," she said, as the hairdresser styled Melissa's hair. "But he also expects the same from those around him. Loyalty is not just a word to him." By 1:30, Melissa was ready. A simple white A-line dress, a modest veil, minimal jewelry. Everything was in line with their budget and tastes. She looked beautiful, but not provocative, which perfectly reflected her character. At that time, 20 minutes away from the hotel, Jason Morris was finishing his morning shift at the Olive Garden restaurant. The 30-year-old chef had been working there for a year and a half after losing his job at a more prestigious establishment due to cutbacks. His relationship with Melissa had ended 2 years ago, but they remained friends, occasionally calling each other or meeting for coffee. A week ago, Melissa called him and apologized for not being able to invite him to her wedding. She explained that she wanted to keep the ceremony private for her closest friends and family, but Jason sensed uncertainty in her voice. He knew Melissa well enough to understand that the decision was not hers to make. After work, Jason drove home, but something made him change his route and head for the little white church on the north side of Las Vegas Boulevard. He didn't plan to attend the ceremony, he just wanted to make sure Melissa was really happy. Perhaps it was foolish, but his last conversation with her had left him with an uneasy feeling. The Little White Church was one of the most famous wedding chapels in Las Vegas. It was a small white building in the style of the 1940s, where thousands of couples, from ordinary tourists to celebrities, had been married. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the area was already filled with guests, about 30 people, mostly David's colleagues from the construction site, a few casino employees, and relatives. David stood near the altar in a dark blue suit he had bought especially for the day. His massive build made him look more like a security guard than a groom, but his expression was solemn and happy. Standing next to him was his best friend, Mike Rodriguez, also a foreman who had been working for the same company for 10 years. When the wedding marches sounded from the old speakers at 4 o'clock, all the guests turned toward the entrance. Melissa walked down the narrow aisle between rows of folding chairs, and even in a simple dress, she looked radiant. Linda Cole sat in the front row, wiping tears with a handkerchief, and next to her were the bride's colleagues. The ceremony was short and traditional. The priest, an elderly man with a kindly face who had been performing such ceremonies for 30 years, read the standard vows. David and Melissa exchanged rings, simple gold wedding bands without frills. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the priest said solemnly. "You may kiss the bride." David kissed Melissa with such passion that some of the guests laughed and applauded. At that moment, she truly felt happy. All the doubts and anxieties of the past few weeks faded into the background. But as the newlyweds made their way to the exit, accepting congratulations from the guests, Melissa noticed a familiar figure at the far wall of the church. Jason stood in the shadows, dressed in his work uniform, watching the proceedings. Their eyes met for a moment, He nodded to her and quietly exited through a side door. David didn't notice this episode. He was busy talking to guests and organizing the move to the restaurant. But Linda Cole saw everything. Her gaze followed her daughter-in-law's, and when she saw the man leaving, her face darkened. The reception was held at Carmine's restaurant, 2 blocks from the church. The establishment specialized in family celebrations and offered ready-made packages for wedding banquets. The hall was decorated with white and pink ribbons, and the tables were set with simple but high-quality tableware. The first 2 hours passed in a traditional atmosphere of joy and merriment. The guests ate, drank, and made toasts. Mike Rodriguez told funny stories about David from work, and Melissa's colleagues shared memories of the casino. The newlyweds looked happy, dancing their first dance to Etta James at last. But when the evening moved into a more informal phase, Linda approached Melissa, who was standing near the cake talking to her friends. "I need to talk to you," her mother-in-law said quietly. They moved to a corner of the room, away from the other guests. Linda looked serious and a little worried. "I saw that man at the church. It was him, wasn't it? The one you wanted to invite?" Melissa felt her heart beat faster. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, dear. I know what a man looks like when he looks at a woman with regret." Linda put her hand on her daughter-in-law's shoulder. "David mustn't know about this, especially today." Melissa nodded, feeling the joy of the wedding begin to be overshadowed by anxiety. She hadn't asked Jason to come, but his presence touched her for some reason. Perhaps because he was connected to a period of her life when she felt more free. The rest of the evening passed without incident. The guests gradually dispersed, leaving the newlyweds with their close relatives and friends. By 10 o'clock, the hall was almost empty, and David suggested they go to the hotel. The room at the Palms was decorated with rose petals and a bottle of champagne from the hotel management, the standard package for newlyweds. David was in high spirits, talking about how wonderful the day had been and how happy he was that they were now officially a family. Melissa stood by the window, still in her wedding dress, looking at the city lights. Las Vegas never slept. Even at midnight, the Strip sparkled with neon lights, and crowds of tourists and locals moved through the streets. "What are you thinking about?" David asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "About how everything has changed in one day," she replied. "This morning I was Melissa Jones, and now I'm Melissa Cole. Do you like the sound of it?" "Yes," she turned to face him. "I like it." They kissed and undressed slowly, savoring the moment. David was gentle and passionate at the same time, but even in intimacy, Melissa could feel his need for control. He wanted to know what she was feeling, what she was thinking, whether she liked what he was doing. After they made love, David fell asleep quickly, as he always did after physical exertion. Melissa lay next to him, listening to his steady breathing and the sounds of the city outside the window. Thoughts about the past day, her new last name, and the future swirled in her head. She thought about Jason, about why he had come to the church. She thought about Linda's warning and how quickly the festive atmosphere could change with a single glance. She thought about how she was now married, which meant a new level of commitment and responsibility. Sometime around 2 in the morning, Melissa finally fell asleep, unaware that this would be one of the last peaceful nights of her life. Beyond the wall of the room, she could hear the muffled sounds of other guests, music from the neighboring casinos, and the distant hum of cars. Las Vegas continued its nightlife, indifferent to the personal dramas and family conflicts of its inhabitants. On Monday morning, Mrs. Melissa Cole will wake up to a new reality, where her every action and choice will have consequences she cannot foresee. Monday, October 28th, 2024. Melissa woke up at 6:30 in the morning to the sound of running water in the bathroom. David was taking a shower, humming a tune, a rarity for him, who was usually silent in the mornings. Sunlight streamed through the thick curtains of the hotel room, creating streaks of light on the carpet, which was strewn with rose petals from the previous evening. She lay in bed, getting used to the new feeling of the wedding ring on her finger. The gold ring felt heavier than she had expected, a constant reminder of her new status. Mrs. Cole. For the first time in 24 years, her last name had changed, and that required psychological adjustment. David emerged from the bathroom with a towel around his waist, water dripping from his massive frame. Seeing that his wife was awake, he smiled and sat down on the edge of the bed. "Good morning, Mrs. Cole." His voice sounded calm, but there was a new intensity in his eyes. "Good morning," she replied, sitting up in bed. "How did you sleep?" "Great. How about you?" Melissa nodded, although she had actually slept restlessly. Her dreams had been strange and disturbing. She had seen herself in a maze of mirrors where each reflection showed a different version of her future. In one mirror, she was a happy mother of a family. In another, she was an exhausted woman with bruises under her eyes. "Do we have plans for today?" she asked. "I have to go to work. We missed Friday because of the last-minute preparations, and the project can't wait." David began to get dressed, pulling on his work jeans and flannel shirt. "You can take care of the move. We need to move your things from the old apartment." Melissa felt a slight irritation. They had discussed the move, but she had been hoping for a few days of honeymoon, even if it was just time together in the city. But she didn't argue. She understood that David was serious about his work. After he left, she stayed in the room until noon, enjoying the rare luxury of idleness. But around 2 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Linda Cole. "Dear, how was your first morning of marriage?" "Fine, thank you." David left for work. Of course, the men in our family always put responsibility first. There was pride in Linda's voice, but also something else. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you. Can you come over to my house? There are things you need to know about the family you've joined." Linda's house was located in an old neighborhood of Las Vegas, built in the 1970s when the city was just beginning to become a tourist mecca. Single-story houses with small yards, surrounded by concrete fences to protect against the desert winds. The neighborhood wasn't poor, but it wasn't affluent either, a typical place for working-class, middle-class families. Linda met her at the door, dressed in a bathrobe and slippers. Without her evening makeup and in the daylight, she looked tired and aged. The wrinkles around her eyes were deeper than they had seemed before, and her gray hair roots were more noticeable. "Come in, sit down. Would you like some coffee?" They sat down at the kitchen table, covered with a floral oilcloth. Family photos hung on the walls, David at various ages, from infancy to high school graduation. In some of the pictures, he was standing next to a middle-aged man with harsh features and cold eyes. "That's David's father," Linda remarked, following her daughter-in-law's gaze. "Robert Cole, a good worker, a good provider, but a difficult man." Melissa studied the photos closely. In all of them, Robert looked tense, even when he smiled. Teenage David also seemed stiff in the photos, as if he were afraid of doing something wrong. Robert loved his family, but he had specific ideas about how relationships between men and women should be. Linda took a sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. He believed that the husband should be the head of the family in everything, that a wife should ask permission even to go to the store. Melissa felt an unpleasant chill in her stomach. "And you agreed with that?" "I had no choice back then. Robert could be persuasive when he wanted to be." Linda rolled up the sleeve of her robe, exposing her arm. Barely visible but still discernible scars were visible on her wrist. "That's from the time I tried to go to the doctor without his permission. David was 14 at the time." My God. Robert never hit me hard. He was smarter than that. Bruises can be hidden, but a broken arm can't. But the psychological pressure was constant, checking phone bills, controlling every dollar, questioning who I talked to and where I went. Melissa listened, feeling her anxiety grow. The story sounded all too familiar, reminding her of certain aspects of David's behavior in recent weeks. Did David see all this? David adored his father. Robert never raised a hand to him, was always patient with his son. But the boy grew up watching what a relationship between a man and a woman should look like. Linda looked her sister-in-law straight in the eye. After Robert died, I thought David would be different. And in some ways, he is different. But some patterns of behavior are passed down from father to son, even when we don't want them to be. Why are you telling me this? Because I saw the way he looked at you yesterday. Because I noticed how tense he became when he saw that man in church, even though you think he didn't notice. Linda leaned closer. David knows about Jason, and he won't forget. For the next 2 hours, Linda told her family history, about how Robert had gradually isolated her from her friends and relatives, about how he controlled the finances, demanding an account of every purchase, about how he checked the car's odometer to make sure she hadn't driven farther than she said she had, about how he read her diary and looked through her purse. The worst part wasn't the physical abuse, Linda said. The worst part was that over time, you start to believe that you deserve to be treated that way, that you really can't make the right decisions without a man. When Melissa returned to the hotel around 6 in the evening, David was already there. He was sitting on the bed with some documents in his hands, some kind of working drawings and estimates. When he saw his wife, he put the papers down and smiled. "How was your day? Did you work on the move?" "I went to see your mom. We talked about the family." David's expression changed instantly. The smile disappeared and his eyes became wary. "What exactly?" "About your childhood. About your father." David got up from the bed and walked to the window, turning his back to her. His shoulders tensed under his shirt. "Mom likes to tell stories. Not all of them are true." She showed me the scars on her arm. "My father was a good man. He worked 16 hours a day to provide for his family. If he lost his temper sometimes, it's understandable." David turned to face her, his gaze steely. "Every marriage has its problems, but a family must remain united. David, your mother told me things that sound like domestic violence. My mother tends to be dramatic, and unfortunately, she never understood what it means to be the wife of a man who takes responsibility." His voice grew colder. "I hope you won't repeat her mistakes." Melissa felt the air in the room grow thicker. She had heard that tone before, but now it sounded more threatening. "What do you mean?" "I mean loyalty, honesty, respect for your husband." David took a step closer to her. "Like telling me that your ex-boyfriend came to our wedding." Melissa's heart skipped a beat. "I didn't know he was coming. But you saw him, and you didn't tell me." Another step closer. "This isn't the best way to start a marriage, Melissa. I didn't want to upset you on a day like this. And now you're upsetting me even more because you're lying." David was now standing right in front of her, and his physical presence felt overwhelming. "Have you seen him since our wedding?" "Of course not." "How do I know? You've already lied to me once." The next half hour was spent in a tense conversation that felt more like an interrogation. David asked questions about every aspect of her relationship with Jason when they had last spoken, what he might have wanted by coming to the wedding. Melissa answered honestly, but she could feel her husband becoming more suspicious and aggressive with each answer. "I want you to stop all communication with him," David finally said. "No calls, no messages, no chance encounters." "Okay," Melissa agreed, realizing that resistance would only make the situation worse. "And I want you to give me the password to your phone." "Why?" "Because there should be no secrets between husband and wife. Because trust must be earned." David held out his hand. "Your phone." Melissa hesitated. Giving him the password meant a complete invasion of her privacy. But refusing meant even more conflict, and she was already emotionally drained. She gave him her phone and password. David spent the next 20 minutes looking through her messages, calls, and social media. Melissa sat on the edge of the bed, feeling like a criminal awaiting sentencing. When he finally returned her phone, his face was grim. "Did you delete anything?" "No." "Then why are there no messages from Jason?" "Because we didn't text. We only talked on the phone and rarely." David nodded, but looked unconvinced. The rest of the evening passed in heavy silence. They had dinner at the hotel restaurant, but the conversation was awkward. Melissa felt her husband studying her every move, every expression on her face. Before bed, David became tender again, apologized for his harshness, and explained his behavior as strong love and a desire to protect their marriage. But when they made love, Melissa felt something new in his touch: possessiveness, a desire to dominate, a need for complete control. At night, she lay awake, listening to his breathing and thinking about Linda's story. The scars on her mother-in-law's wrist, the photos of a tense teenage David, the warnings about a family tradition of violence. It all added up to a picture she didn't want to see, but couldn't ignore. At 3 a.m, Melissa quietly got up and went to the window. Las Vegas sparkled with lights, full of life and possibilities. Somewhere out there, in that city, lived Jason, who had known her before she became Mrs. Cole. Somewhere out there was her old apartment, where she could make her own decisions. But here, in this room, lay her husband, who was already beginning to build walls around her that were getting higher and stronger every day. Tuesday, October 29th, 2024. Maria Vasquez arrived at work at the Palms Hotel at 7 a.m. as usual. 53 years old, 22 years of experience as a maid in various Las Vegas hotels, mother of 3 grown children. She had seen everything there was to see in hotel rooms, from drug overdoses to suicides, from wild parties to family dramas. Nothing could surprise her anymore. She started on the 21st floor, methodically cleaning the rooms that had been vacated by guests. The cart with cleaning supplies, fresh linens, and towels squeaked across the carpeted hallway. At 8:30, she reached room 2347, where the Newlyweds were staying. According to the log, they were supposed to check out by 11 a.m., but Maria knew that Newlyweds often lingered. She knocked on the door 3 times. Silence. She waited a minute, knocked again, louder. "Housekeeping!" No answer. Maria took out her MasterCard and opened the door, first opening it a few inches. "Hello? Housekeeping." Silence. She entered the room. The first thing that caught her eye was the mess. The furniture had been moved, the lamp on the bedside table was on the floor, and the lampshade was cracked. The sheets were tangled at the foot of the bed. Rose petals, which the administration had used to decorate the room for Newlyweds, were scattered on the carpet, but now they were trampled and mixed with some dark substance. Maria took a few more steps into the room and saw legs sticking out from behind the bed. They were a woman's legs in white stockings, one of which was torn. "Miss, are you okay?" She walked around the bed and saw the body. Melissa Cole was lying on her back between the bed and the wall, dressed in a white nightgown that was now stained with blood. Maria instinctively turned away, feeling nausea rising. In 22 years of work, she had never seen anything like this. Her eye sockets were empty, bloody holes. Her face was contorted with pain and horror. Below the waist, the nightgown was torn, revealing signs of brutal violence. Blood soaked the carpet beneath the body. Maria ran out of the room, her hands shaking as she reached for her phone. At 8:47 a.m., the Las Vegas Police Department dispatcher received a call about a possible murder at the Palms Hotel. The first patrol crew arrived 9 minutes later. Officers Thomas Chen and Jennifer Marquez went up to the 23rd floor, where they were met by a pale Maria Vasquez and hotel manager Franklin. Officer Chen, a veteran with 15 years of experience, entered the room first. One glance at the body was enough to know this was no ordinary murder. The degree of brutality pointed to either a mentally ill perpetrator or a crime committed in a state of extreme rage. "Call the detectives and crime scene investigators," he told his partner. "This is serious." By 9:30, Detective Sarah Reeves had arrived on the scene. 45 years old, divorced, 2 grown children, 18 years on the force, the last 7 in the homicide division. A short woman with short graying hair and piercing brown eyes, she had earned a reputation as one of the best detectives in the department. Reeves studied the hotel registration log. The room had been booked in the name of David Cole for 2 nights, from Sunday to Tuesday. Newlyweds. The wedding took place on Sunday, and the murder occurred on Tuesday morning or late Monday night. The initial examination of the crime scene took 2 hours. Forensic experts photographed every inch of the room and collected samples of blood, hair, and possible DNA traces. The body was found between the bed and the wall, indicating that the victim had tried to hide or had been cornered. 2 wedding rings, 1 male and 1 female, were found on the bedside table. This was strange. Why did the killer remove the rings from the victim's fingers? Or did the victim remove them herself before she died? Traces of blood were found in the bathroom sink and on towels. Someone had tried to wash themselves after the crime. The word "slut" was written in red lipstick on the mirror. Dr. Elizabeth Hamilton, a medical examiner with 20 years of experience, arrived at 11 in the morning. Her preliminary conclusion was shocking even to experienced police officers. Death was caused by suffocation, she told Detective Reeves. But before that, the victim was subjected to extremely brutal violence. The eyes were gouged out while she was still alive, judging by the nature of the bleeding. There are also signs of sexual assault with a blunt object. How long did it take? Judging by the nature of the wounds, the agony lasted at least 30 minutes, possibly longer. Reeves felt a familiar mixture of anger and determination. Over the years, she had seen many violent crimes, but this one stood out for its particular senseless cruelty. Someone hadn't just killed this woman. Someone had wanted to cause her maximum suffering. By noon, a perimeter had been established, the room sealed off, and the body sent to the morgue. The search for the victim's husband began. David Cole was found at a construction site near the Bellagio Casino, where he worked as a foreman. When Detective Reeves and her partner Michael Torres arrived at the site, the workers were already having lunch. David was sitting on a toolbox, eating a sandwich and talking to his colleagues. "Mr. Cole, Detective Reeves, Las Vegas Police Department. We need to talk to you." David's expression changed instantly. There was no trace of relaxation left. "What's going on?" "Your wife was found dead in a hotel room." David dropped his sandwich and slowly stood up. His face turned white as chalk. "What do you mean?" "We're investigating the circumstances. You need to come with us to the station." The drive to the station was silent. David sat in the back seat of the police car, staring out the window. Detective Reeves watched him in the rearview mirror. His reaction seemed genuine, but she knew that good actors could fool even experienced police officers. At the station, David was placed in an interrogation room, a small room with a table, 3 chairs, and a one-way mirror. The walls were painted a pale green, which psychologists consider to be calming. The fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows on his face. "Tell me about your relationship with your wife," Detective Reeves began. For the next 2 hours, David recounted the story of how they met, their romance, and their wedding. His version of events was consistent and detailed. They got married on Sunday, spent their wedding night in a hotel, and on Monday morning he went to work while she planned to move house. "When was the last time you saw your wife alive?" "Yesterday morning, around 6:30. I was leaving for work." "How was your Monday?" "Normal. I worked on set until 6 in the evening, then went home." "Home is where?" "Our apartment in Summerlin. Melissa was supposed to move there from her old apartment." "But she didn't show up?" "No. I thought she was delayed packing her things." "Did you call her?" David hesitated for a split second. "I called, but she didn't answer." "What time?" "Around 7 in the evening, then again at 9. "And what did you do when she didn't answer?" "Nothing special. I figured her phone was dead or she was busy. Detective Reeves took notes, carefully observing the suspect's body language. David looked nervous, but that was natural for a man who had just learned of his wife's death. Mr. Cole, did your wife have any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt her? No, no one. Melissa worked as a dealer at a casino and everyone knew her as a pleasant, friendly girl. What about ex-boyfriends? Another pause. There was one, Jason Morris, but they broke up over 2 years ago. Did they keep in touch? No, maybe they talked on the phone occasionally, but nothing serious. Was he at your wedding? David clenched his jaw. No, we didn't invite him. But Detective Reeves already knew that wasn't the whole truth. Witnesses at the church had seen a man matching Jason Morris's description. While David was being questioned, other detectives were searching for and questioning the rest of the victim's circle. Linda Cole was found at home, in shock from the news of her sister-in-law's death. Her alibi for Monday evening was simple. She was home alone, watching television. Jason Morris worked at the Olive Garden restaurant on Monday until 6 p.m., after which he drove home. Neighbors confirmed that they saw his car near the house in the evening, but could not specify the exact time. By the end of the day, Detective Reeves had a preliminary picture of the case. A young woman, recently married, was found dead in a hotel room after a particularly brutal murder. Her husband claims he spent the evening at home, but he has no alibi. The victim's ex-boyfriend secretly attended the wedding, despite being banned. The mother-in-law told her daughter-in-law stories of domestic violence. Everything pointed to a crime motivated by jealousy or family conflict. But Detective Reeves knew that in murder cases, the obvious theories often turned out to be false. The real truth was usually hidden deeper. At 10 o'clock in the evening, she sat in her office, studying photos from the crime scene and interrogation records. The brutality of the murder pointed to personal motives. Someone hated Melissa Cole, or what she symbolized very much. A long night of work and an even longer investigation lay ahead. On Tuesday, October 29th, Melissa Cole was found dead in her room at the Palms Hotel by maid Maria Vasquez. The body was discovered between the bed and the wall, with her eyes gouged out and signs of brutal sexual assault. The word slut was written in lipstick on the bathroom mirror. Detective Sarah Reeves began the investigation by questioning the main suspects. David Cole claimed he spent the evening at home waiting for his wife, but he had no alibi. Jason Morris worked until 6 p.m., then drove home. Linda Cole was home alone. All of the statements required further verification, and the nature of the crime pointed to personal motives on the part of the killer, who knew the victim well enough to feel such hatred toward her. The story, Wednesday, October 30th, 2024. Detective Sarah Reeves arrived at the station at 6 in the morning, 2 hours earlier than usual. She had spent the night analyzing evidence and studying the suspect's phone records. The first forensic results were due at 8 a.m., and she wanted to be prepared for the next stage of the investigation. The detective's office was a typical police workplace: a metal desk, an old computer, a board with photos and diagrams of current cases. Diplomas and commendations for 18 years of service hung on the wall. In the corner stood a coffee maker that ran almost around the clock. Reeves laid out the case materials on the table, creating a timeline of events. Sunday, the wedding at the Little White Church, the appearance of Jason Morris. Monday morning, David leaves for work. Melissa plans to move. Monday evening, the estimated time of the murder. Tuesday morning, discovery of the body. At 8 o'clock, a call came in from Dr. Hamilton at the medical examiner's office. "I have preliminary results," she said. Time of death is between 8 and 11 p.m. on Monday. Skin tissue and blood not belonging to the victim were found under her fingernails. DNA analysis will take a few more days, but we can say that she resisted. What about the murder weapon? The strangulation was done by hand. The marks on the neck indicate a man with large, strong hands. The eyes were gouged out with a blunt object, possibly a spoon or similar instrument. What about the sexual assault? It was done after death. The perpetrator used a champagne bottle that was in the room. Reeves felt disgust. Even after many years of working in the homicide department, such details were not easy to deal with. But it was often these details that helped to understand the personality of the perpetrator. At 9 in the morning, she met with Detective Torres to discuss the results of the suspect's alibi checks. Torres, a stocky 42-year-old man with a 1980s-style mustache, had been working with Reeves for 3 years. "I checked the hotel's security cameras," he reported. "David Cole left his room at 7:15 a.m. on Monday and didn't appear on the tapes again until Tuesday morning, when we arrested him." "What about the other suspects?" "Jason Morris did work until 6 p.m. on Monday. His co-workers confirmed that. But after that, no one saw him until Tuesday morning." "What about Linda Cole?" "An interesting detail. Her neighbor, Mrs. Garcia, saw Linda leave the house on Monday around 8 p.m. and return 2 hours later." This was the first serious discrepancy in the testimony. Linda claimed she had spent the entire evening at home, but her neighbor had seen her car. At 9:30, Reeves and Torres drove to Linda Cole's house for a second interview. The house in the old neighborhood looked even more shabby in the daylight. The paint was peeling off the walls, weeds were growing in the yard, and the mailbox was damaged. Linda met them at the door, wearing the same housecoat she had worn the day before. But now, her face showed not only fatigue, but also wariness. "Mrs. Cool, we need to clarify a few details about Monday evening," Detective Reeves began. "I already told you everything. I was at home, watching TV. Your neighbor saw you leave around 8 o'clock in the evening." Linda froze for a moment, then invited the detectives into the house. The living room smelled of cigarettes and something else, perhaps alcohol. There was an ashtray full of cigarette butts on the coffee table. "Yes, I did go out. I forgot to mention it. I went to the store to buy cigarettes." "Which store?" "The gas station, 2 blocks from here." "And how long did that take?" "About an hour, maybe a little longer. I ran into an acquaintance there and we got to talking." Detective Reeves took notes, but something about Linda's behavior seemed unnatural. Too many pauses, too many details for a simple trip to the store. "Mrs. Cole, tell me again about your conversation with Melissa on Monday." "We talked about family, about my late husband." "What exactly did you tell her?" Linda lit a cigarette with trembling hands. "The truth. About what Robert was like. About how David had inherited some of his traits." "What traits exactly?" "The need for control, jealousy, the inability to accept that a woman can have her own thoughts and desires." For the next half hour, Linda recounted the details of her family history, about how Robert gradually isolated her from her friends and relatives, about how he checked every purchase, every phone call, every trip, about how he resorted to physical violence when psychological pressure didn't work. Did David witness this? David adored his father. Robert presented our tense interactions as the norm for family life. My son believed that a man should be the head of the family in everything. Did you see signs of this behavior in David? Linda took a drag on her cigarette, thinking about her answer. In the last few weeks before the wedding, he became more demanding. He called Melissa several times a day, wanting to know where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. And on Monday, did he contact you? Yes. He called around 7 in the evening. He asked if I had seen Melissa. He said she wasn't answering her phone. And what did you say? That I hadn't seen her since Sunday morning at the wedding. How did he sound? Agitated, angry. I thought he suspected her of something. The detectives left Linda's house with new information, but also with new questions. If David had called his mother at 7 p.m. to express concern about his wife's whereabouts, it could confirm his alibi. Or conversely, it could indicate that he was creating a false trail. After lunch, the results of the phone records analysis arrived. David had indeed called Melissa twice on Monday, at 7:15 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. Both calls went unanswered. He also called his mother at 7:45 p.m. But the most important discovery was the surveillance footage from the gas station where, according to Linda, she had gone to buy cigarettes. The cameras showed that she was indeed there on Monday evening, but not at 8 p.m., but at 10:30 p.m., and she only stayed for a few minutes. 4 days later, Detective Reeves summoned Linda for a second interview at the police station. This time, the atmosphere was more formal. An interrogation room, a tape recorder turned on, a warning about her rights. "Mrs. Cole, we checked the surveillance cameras at the gas station. You were there at 10:30 p.m., not at 8 p.m. as you claimed." Linda sat motionless, staring at the table. She was silent for a few minutes, then slowly raised her head. "I went to see her." "Who?" "Melissa, to the hotel." The air in the room grew thick. Detective Reeves felt adrenaline begin to circulate in her blood. "What time?" "Around 8. I wanted to talk to her again, to explain that I didn't tell her to turn her against David." "What happened in the room?" "We had an argument." Linda's voice grew quieter. She said she was going to leave David, that she couldn't live with a man who would control her every move. And I tried to explain to her that all men are like that you have to adapt, find compromises, that destroying the marriage 2 days after the wedding would hurt David. But she didn't agree? She laughed. Linda clenched her fists. She laughed and said that I had brainwashed myself with 30 years of slavery, that she wasn't going to repeat my mistakes. For the next 40 minutes, Linda recounted the details of that evening, how the conversation escalated into an argument, how Melissa said she planned to get a divorce and go back to Jason, how she called the Cole family sick and toxic. "I tried to explain to her that she was destroying my son's life," Linda said, "that David wouldn't survive without her, that she had no right to play with men's feelings." "What happened next?" "She said I needed psychiatric help, that I was a victim who protected her tormentors." Linda's voice turned cold. "She called me an accomplice to violence." "And then you attacked her?" "I just wanted to shut her up. I grabbed her by the throat to stop her from saying those horrible things." Detective Reeves listened intently, writing down every word. The psychology of the crime became clear. A woman broken by years of abuse had killed her sister-in-law, who threatened to destroy the only thing that gave her life meaning, her role as her son's protector. "Tell me what happened after you strangled her." Linda was silent for a few minutes, gathering her strength. "I realized I had killed her, and I thought about how it would affect David. They would blame him, the jealous husband." She looked the detective straight in the eye. "I decided to make it look like the crime of a sex maniac." "Is that why you mutilated the body?" "I thought that way the police would be looking for a mentally ill stranger, not a family member." Linda recounted how she removed her sister-in-law's wedding rings to make it look like a robbery, how she used a bottle of champagne to simulate sexual assault, how she gouged out her eyes with an ice cream spoon from the minibar because I couldn't stand her gaze even after death. The writing on the mirror? I wanted to show that the killer thought she was a promiscuous woman. By Wednesday evening, Linda Cole was formally arrested on charges of first-degree murder. Her confession was complete and detailed, supported by physical evidence and inconsistencies in her initial statements. David Cole was released and informed that his mother had confessed to murdering his wife. His reaction was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and grief. He declined to comment further and left the station accompanied by his attorney. Jason Morris was also cleared of suspicion. In his last meeting with Detective Reeves, he said that he had always felt something was wrong in Melissa's relationship with her new family, but he could never have imagined such a tragic outcome. Linda Cole's trial began in February 2025. The defense attempted to prove the defendant's insanity, citing decades of psychological and physical abuse that had distorted her perception of reality. A psychiatric evaluation confirmed the presence of post-traumatic stress disorder and signs of domestic violence victim syndrome. The prosecution insisted that, despite her tragic personal history, Linda had committed cold-blooded murder and attempted to cover up the crime, indicating that she understood the illegality of her actions. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witness testimony included accounts from neighbors about the Cole family situation, expert psychiatric opinions on the impact of domestic violence on the victim's mental state, and a detailed analysis of the crime scene. In March 2025, the jury found Linda Cole guilty of second-degree murder with mitigating circumstances. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. David Cole left Las Vegas a month after the trial. According to unconfirmed reports, he moved to Oregon, where he found a job with a small construction company. Jason Morris continued to work as a chef, but also left the city 6 months later.